Welcome in, welcome in. So let's talk Michigan football. So I'm not going to get into, there's stuff talk coming out about the Michigan culture under Jim Harbaugh. And they said there was a quote. We're not going to go too much into this, but Jim Harbaugh came out with a quote, "Go to the line and cross it." So I don't know. To me, Michigan will always have they cheated, but people always say they can cheated, and I don't even know. Yeah, there were some things that sounds like Harbaugh broke, but I would say this, not to try to put aside what they did, because they did break the rules technically, but Michigan, I would say that Jim Harbaugh, the bottom line was, and other guys have talked about this before, he did what he was supposed to do, turn Michigan into a winner, a strong program, recruited well, coached well, and won them a national championship. So credit Jim Harbaugh. And I'm looking forward to what Harbaugh does with the Chargers. But yeah, so I kind of just want to touch on that just because there's a lot of news on Harbaugh right now. So, but that's the main quote, "Go to the goal line and cross it." But yeah, talking about this in depth can kind of go down a string of negativity. So we're just going to put this aside, guys, even though it could be interesting for most to talk about just because it's new. But let's just get into talking Michigan football as far as next year is concerned. So here's a CBS article, Michigan Football 2024 Practice News, Camp Storylines, Depth Chart, Predictions. Talking about the roster turnover. New faces, Alex Orji likely going to be the starting quarterback. The one thing we do know is there is going to be a new starting quarterback for Michigan. It will not be J.J. McCarthy, obviously. CBS is saying it's a 5-man battle at the quarterback position. Look, I'll say this. I disagree with that. I see why they would think that, but I disagree with that it's a 5-man battle, because when is like a whatever position? When is there? I don't know. I guess I don't know how to articulate. There's usually, at any school, any level of football, rarely ever a 5-man battle. There's about two. For Michigan, there's probably about 2-3 guys that have a legit. It's Orji, Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle. Maybe Jaden Davis. I don't know. Denegal. So I would say, but Davis and Denegal, they're certainly maybes. Honest. And even with Jack Tuttle, I like Jack Tuttle, but Jack Tuttle is one of those guys where I don't want to sound like I'm being negative towards Tuttle, but a lot of guys that have been in college for a long time, sometimes they just are who they are. Like, Jack Tuttle is like a solid, experienced guy. That's who he is. But is he a guy that's going to give you necessarily, is he like the swing for the fence, the upside potential? Probably not. So legitimately, it's probably Alex Orji, Davis Warren. Probably those two guys it's probably legitimately a battle between those two guys, but then Jack Tuttle might be in the discussion. And then Jaden Davis, Denegal. So legitimately for Michigan, it's probably a 3-quarterback race. Yeah, Donovan Edwards, one of the biggest, I guess, question marks, if you will, for Michigan football this year. The hope certainly is that he has a big season. Like people talk about before, he looks more like the 2022 Donovan Edwards that was having a big game against Ohio State in the Horseshoe. That's preferably what we want to see for Donovan Edwards. Or the Donovan Edwards against Washington in the national championship game. So M Live, here's what they believe where Michigan stands at quarterback. At quarterback always the main topic of discussion. I mean, at any college program, especially for Michigan this year, just because they got to replace a really good one, a guy that led them to 2 Big Ten championships as a starter, won 3, and then won a national championship in J.J. McCarthy. So, of course, it's going to be certainly a big storyline for Michigan. Where's this one website? They got a lot of interesting articles. Michigan football. Is it Maize and Brew? Is that the website? There's a website that's got really good articles all about Michigan. It's SB Nation. Yeah, just have some interesting articles. Donovan Edwards included in the Doak Walker Award watch list. Yeah, it makes sense. Like I discussed before, people forget Donovan Edwards was being discussed as maybe the top running back that was eligible for this past year's 2024 draft. Obviously, didn't have as good a season and then chose to come back to Michigan for this 2024 year. But Donovan Edwards, a lot of upside, especially a versatile guy that can catch the ball. So Frederick Moore. Yeah, Frederick Moore, you get the feel. Yeah, this article says it best. Frederick Moore is an interesting guy to watch. And this article is titled, Michigan Football Players are the Most to Gain During Fall Camp. Yeah, Frederick Moore is a guy who... No more Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson. There's some production that needs to be replaced. I mean, obviously, that's high expectation for Frederick Moore to replace the production of Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson, or at least or even Roman Wilson for that matter. But Frederick Moore is a good football player, and yeah, Michigan needs a guy to step up. Tyler Morris, Samaj Morgan, Frederick Moore, they're all good receivers, but can one of those guys step up and be the true go-to receiver, elite difference maker? Could it be like Samaj Morgan could be that guy? I certainly can see it. Frederick Moore, they name here. Not necessarily they're proclaiming Frederick Moore is going to be that guy that steps up, but they're saying that Frederick Moore is a guy that just has a lot to gain. Saying I talked about, he did play in 13 games, appearing predominantly in special teams. Greg Crippen, too. Crippen likely the starter at center. Battle between him and Raheem Anderson. Michigan, the starting center has been pretty good for Michigan the last 2 years. This past year, Drake Nugent, Michigan did a nice job of working the transfer portal and getting Nugent from Stanford. And then in 2022, getting Oluwatimi from Virginia. TJ Guy, they have as a potential breakout player. Jaden McBurrows. Yeah, McBurrow's been with the team for a few years now. And then, yeah, it talks about, here's guys on Bruce Feldman's Freaks List. So this is, if you're not familiar with the Freaks List, Bruce Feldman releases this Freaks List each year. Just some of the freakiest guys in college football, whether they have a really good vertical, really impressive 40 time, or they're just really big, really strong. So they got Kenneth Grant. Yeah, Kenneth Grant is a pretty freakish D tackle. And then, yeah. Looks like they're just talking about, or I think this is Bruce Feldman talking about in the article that because it's a quotes here. Talk about Michigan's done a really a nice job of developing defensive linemen from Rashawn Gary to Kwity Paye to Aiden Hutchinson to Mozzie Smith to Chris Jenkins. So, yeah, Kenneth Grant, big guy, moves well for a guy that of his size, and a guy that Pro Football, not even just Michigan people are hyping Kenneth Grant up. Kenneth Grant's getting some buzz on Pro Football Focus. You saw it in their early rankings for guys eligible for next year's draft. You saw Kenneth Grant as the number 2 ranked defensive tackle. Alex Orji, too. Yeah, Alex Orji, I'll say this. Even if you never watched Alex Orji take a snap, he's a guy that is a physical specimen when you look at him. Six-pack abs, 6'3", 238 pounds, lean, muscular build, very defined in the upper body. So, yeah, Alex Orji, really good football player. Yeah, here's a video of him working out. Phenomenal shape. Will Johnson, too. Yeah, I think... I don't even think you need anyone to tell you. I don't even think you need Michigan fans or Bruce Feldman to tell you that Will Johnson's a freak. I think that the rest of the country will tell you that Will Johnson's a freak. The defensive MVP of the 2023 National Championship game. Johnson, 6'2", 202 pounds, size, athleticism, change of direction, fluid athlete, agile, 4 interceptions with 1 pick six last year, 8 pass breakups. 3-cone drill is 6.57. .10.8 broad jump. I wonder what Will Johnson will run the 40. I don't know if he'll actually run a blazing time. I can see him being maybe high 4.3s, low 4.4s probably. But yeah, the three cone really says a lot about, or the three cone really says quite a bit about corners, I would say, and just defensive backs in general, just because it just shows displaying ability to change the direction and bend, right? So here's Michigan's path outlook for 2024. Are Hillman's, is this a safety they landed in the portal? They landed several guys in the transfer portal at in defensive back. Amir Hall, was this guy recent? Richmond. I know Ricky Johnson. Where was he from? He was UNLV. Ricky Johnson at corner. Jaden Mangum from free safety. He's a transfer from Michigan State. Wesley Walker, transfer at strong safety. He's from... been at Louisville, Tennessee, and Georgia Tech. Interesting. And then Amir Hall. I love some of these, just looking at some of these articles. Netflix is doing a documentary on Connor Stallions. Paul Feinbach said Michigan sign stealing scandal is overblown. And then, Will Johnson talking about Jair Hill can make a lot of plays this year. Will Johnson focus on becoming a better leader? Yeah, I guess that, that's interesting because that's one thing that I would say could be lacking. I don't know. Look, I don't know anything. I don't know what Mason Graham's personality, Kenneth Grant, Colston Loveland, some of top Michigan, or Orgy. I don't know what their personality, I don't know what their leadership, I don't know how anything about them as a person. I've never met them. But that could be one thing that limits or holds this Michigan team back is a lack of leadership. Because that's one thing we knew about last year's Michigan team, whether they won the national championship, even if they didn't win the Big Ten championship, or even if they didn't win let alone the national championship, you knew they had some leaders on that football team. Like Zach Zenner appeared to be a leader. J.J. McCarthy certainly was a leader and really set the tone with his work ethic. Even to go back to 2021, Aiden Hutchinson really was not necessarily maybe as vocal of a leader, it seemed, as J.J. McCarthy, but Aiden Hutchinson certainly was a leader by example and just really set the tone by the way he worked. So I guess if that's one thing you want to question, if you're really trying to question what could hold Michigan back this season, I think lack of leadership. Because I don't know, like I said, I don't know anything about I've never met Will Johnson, Colston Loveland, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Donovan Edwards, some of the top players but I don't know. I don't have. It's one of those things where I can question it because I don't know. I don't have evidence that they're not good leaders, but I don't have evidence that I don't hear people saying that they're like guys that dig big time leaders and guys that rally behind them. Which is fine, though. Not every guy is if you play sports, not every good player is a big-time leader. Not every good player leads. Some guys do just want to take the road as leading by example, and that's fine. But I think if you want to win a national championship, if you want to repeat as national championships like Michigan hopes to do, then you want to have at least one guy that's a vocal leader, that's a good leader. So hopefully Will Johnson can be that guy. Michigan talks about here, Michigan number 8 in the USA Today coaches poll, 3rd in the Big Ten behind Ohio State and Oregon. Yeah, Oregon getting a lot of praise. That's what's I was talking about this. Oregon could be, this is what you want to talk about, why it's going to be hard for Michigan to win the Big Ten, because Oregon and Ohio State are going to be legitimately good. How good, that's the question, but we know that those teams are going to be good. Like that, those games against Ohio State and Oregon, like the Michigan-Ohio State game this year could be like last year, game that's really essentially right down to the wire, down to the last drive, and Oregon could be the same as well. Could be a game where it's down to the last drive, a one-score game, a field goal game. If you've watched football, you know those type of games. So that's what I think is going to be tough for Michigan, is Ohio State and Oregon we know are going to be legitimately good. One coach gave Michigan the first place vote. That's interesting. That's actually really interesting. I kind of respect that. Sometimes you got to respect the guy that gives the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, I mean, they are the reigning national champions. I respect that. Do I agree with it? Probably not. Like, I don't, like, being honest, even though I'm a Michigan fan, I don't know if I would rank them number one. But I respect that coach that voted them number one. Why not give him the benefit of the doubt? I don't even know here. Maybe that was Sherrone Moore, but it could have been Sherrone Moore that did it, but who knows? I mean, respect, because, hey, sometimes sometimes giving benefit, there's nothing wrong with giving the benefit of the doubt. Penn State was number 9, USC at 23, Washington unranked. Was that? Looks like Georgia number 1. And it's interesting with Georgia. I will say this with Georgia. I think with Nick Saban retiring, I think Georgia's going to be that team that you just kind of pencil in as the preseason number one. That was kind of Alabama under Nick Saban. You just kind of pencil them in as the preseason number one. Just kind of do that until someone beats them. I think that's the case with Georgia. Obviously, someone did beat Georgia last year, but it was the first time someone beat them in 2 years. So, once again, like in the same way Michigan gets the benefit of the doubt from the one coach, I think Georgia deserves the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, this guy, I don't know, what's the guy that wrote this article? Kellen Vos is his name. So he talks about his initial reaction for the Wolverines seems fair. Yes, a ton of talented future NFL players like Will Johnson, Mason Graham are still on the roster, and plenty of players are getting preseason recognition. But yeah, they lost a lot of key pieces. But yeah, I know I've talked about this ad nauseum, especially if you guys know me, and then obviously if you watch my channel too, you'd hear a lot about this. But you don't see this scenario play out too often. I guess you kind of saw it a little bit. The one time you saw it was Alabama from 2009 to 2010, because 2009 to 2010. 2009 Alabama wins the national championship, lose a lot of guys, a lot of starters, Javier Arenas, Rolando McClain, but they do return Julio Jones, Mark Ingram, Dante Hightower. They had 2 returning starters that year, but they did return 3 key difference makers for sure. Hightower, Julio Jones, Mark Ingram. They had Nick Saban, which was his worst season by a record standpoint, and they slipped from, what was it, 2009 back then, 14-0 to 10-3. So this could be what, and that's what's interesting. A lot of people are thinking like 9-3, 10-3 type of season. So that was probably the closest scenario. I said we almost saw this scenario play out because COVID was weird, but you almost saw this scenario play out a little bit with LSU because they had a mass exodus of guys to the NFL, guys like Joe Burrow, Patrick Queen, Justin Jefferson, but they were supposed to return Jamar Chase and a few other guys, but then Chase opted out too. Derek Stingley was back, but he missed a game for an illness. So you almost saw this scenario play out with LSU. But yeah, it's just so I'm all for interesting. I love interesting scenarios. I like to watch them play out. So yeah, this is certainly an interesting scenario with Michigan, even though a lot of starters gone, a lot of guys lost to the NFL, no coach gone, quarterback gone. I know in the case of Alabama, they did return Nick Saban when you're comparing the 2010 Alabama team to this current Michigan team, but in the case of, and I guess Alabama did return their quarterback too that year, McElroy. But McElroy was a good quarterback, but he wasn't a true difference maker necessarily. So, yeah, I think that's a good comparison. And, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this scenario plays out. One article was talking about Khalil Mullins would be an X factor. Look, Khalil Mullins is a solid running back. Another name I'm going to throw out here, and I've been throwing out his name a lot, and I don't want to talk about him just because I watched him play in high school, but Colt Cabana, another guy too. Colt Cabana is a guy with legitimate home run speed, similar to Edwards, a guy who really good running, good between the tackles, but also a very good wide receiver and pass catcher too. So he's an interesting guy to watch. Jair Hill too. Yeah, Jair Hill could be one of the... It's cool Will Johnson's praising him because Jair Hill, if Michigan has an excellent season, Jair Hill could be one of the guys that plays a big part in that because Jair Hill, big-time recruit, redshirted last year, and the injury to Rod Moore, the secondary. One thing's for certain, if Will Johnson's healthy, they have at least one very good elite corner. But if Jair Hill is good, then you can say we have two legitimate good corners. So Jair Hill, if he plays well, that's big for Michigan football. Quentin Johnson, Makari Page. Makari Page, too, at strong safety. Makari Page is, I always like to pick an underrated player. I've talked about this before, but Makari Page is probably the most underrated player on the Michigan roster. A guy that's, especially because he was a guy that started last year, he's played a lot of football, too. Fourth-year senior. I believe he's a fourth-year senior. Guy out of West Bloomfield, Detroit area. Let me confirm that. I think Makari Page is just a fourth-year senior. I don't think he redshirted. He is a senior, but I don't... let's see. So he would have been class of 2021. Oh, he's been there since 2020, so I think he is so 1, 2, 3, 4. So he's technically a fifth-year senior, sorry. So Makari Page will be as a senior, but this will be his fifth year. Was on the... but I guess technically with the COVID year, he's a fourth-year senior, but it'll be his fifth season playing for Michigan. So, yeah, I just had to clarify that. But yeah, Makari Page, like I was talking about, Makari Page, one of the more underrated players on this Michigan football team. Let's look at some more of these Maize and Brew articles. Yeah, that's funny. There's a couple interesting articles. What Makari Page's path to Michigan outlook for 2024. Talks about here, it was the lowest rated of the 3 safety recruits in the 2020 recruiting class. Saying he's had more of a roller coaster career. Yeah, I forget that. He was R.J. Moten and Rod Moore. But yeah, they just talk, the work he did, and then, the 2022 season. Yeah, the 2022 season was, that's when it clicked for Makari Page. Yeah, he took the starting job by week 5. That's what I remember. Because, that's 2022 was interesting because they're kind of playing a little bit of, they're kind of shuffling the deck at safety a little bit. R.J. Moten, Rod Moore, Makari Page. You had a few guys at safety. And then, Makari Page, that was, middle of the year, early to middle of the year. Makari Page took the job and run with it. He plays fast. He plays physical. Tough dude. I love the guy. I love Makari Page. I like the unsung heroes, and Makari Page certainly is one of the unsung heroes. Not only this past year, but I think it'd be one of the unsung heroes this year. But yeah, continuing with these articles, this will be interesting. What Michigan must have to do to make it back to the college football playoff. I guess the good news for Michigan is it's not going to be as tough a road to the college football playoff this year. But it's certainly not going to be easy. That's what's interesting for Michigan is with the new playoff format, 12 teams, Michigan probably could get in the playoffs with 3 losses. I mean, you think about, look at, if Michigan has 3 losses to Ohio State, hypothetically Ohio State, Oregon, and then let's say USC or Texas, then they wouldn't necessarily have a lot of wins to hang their hat on. I mean, that means they would have beat Washington, and that means they would have beat Washington and then USC or Texas. Let's say hypothetically they lost to Texas. It means they beat USC and Washington. I mean, still, I don't know. I guess in that case, I would say this. I would be pretty confident in Michigan making the playoffs with 2 losses of the schedule. I think if they go 10-2, even if it is losses to Oregon, and Ohio State. That would mean they would beat USC, Texas, Washington, even Michigan State too. It's a rivalry game. So I even think, even with a 10-2 season and losses to Oregon, Ohio State, I feel like that's enough. I feel like that's a strong enough resume with this schedule to get in, but you never know. But yeah, I mean, this article talks about Michigan, like their 2024 schedule is the most difficult we've seen in the last decade. It's interesting though. What if Michigan's schedule wasn't that much tougher though? What if Texas and USC aren't as good as we think? What if Washington takes a big step back? Then you probably, I think, what's very interesting. It's interesting to think, but it might not be true, is Texas. I could see Texas, USC, especially Washington, not being as good as people think, like taking a step back. Well, USC already took a step back, but they may take another. They could potentially take another step back. If those three teams aren't as good as we think, then Michigan's season could be similar to the last few, where it's Ohio State, Penn State. In this case, it's Oregon, Ohio State. You're looking at two really tough games, and the rest of them you should be favorited in. Should be favorites. Now, Michigan may be favorites against Texas, but it's always hard to get a gauge of those early season games. Because what if, like, Texas may be favored? They may both come in. I don't know who Texas plays week 1, but I think it's an opponent they should beat. Here, I'll look that up real quick. But let's say I'll look that up real quick before I make this point. Colorado State. Okay. Texas does have a winnable game week 1. So let's say Michigan and Texas both go into their matchup, both 1-0. Michigan at beating Fresno State, Colorado State. What do we still know about Texas? Colorado State, some can argue Colorado State may be a decent team, but the bottom line is Texas has better talent and they should win that game. So even if Texas is favorites, Michigan could win that game, and then you could see it could be one of those things where Texas loses several games. And you're like, well, Michigan's probably pretty good, but Texas may be just taking a big step back. And then in week 4, Michigan may beat USC, but then you see USC at that point's lost to LSU. Maybe they dropped another game. So I guess I'm just getting back to the point where it could be Ohio State and Oregon are the two tough games for Michigan, similar to Penn State and Ohio State being the tough two games in the past few seasons for Michigan, and Texas, USC, even though on paper you see the Texas logo, the USC logo, the Washington logo, and you think, tough games. But you think tough games on paper, but when the time comes, Michigan could be favorites. And you never know. Texas could lose to Colorado State, and Michigan could be a favorite in that game. I just have I think the Oregon game will be tough for Michigan. That's one of those games where I say this a lot, I try not to make analysis off of feelings. But there's sometimes in life you just get a feeling about something. And to me, there's a strong feeling that Oregon will be a tough game. The game doesn't take place till November 2nd. So that's like November's a little ways away from now. Obviously, we're still in August. But there's times you get a feel. It's like you're gonna have a hard workout today. Your mind's kind of like mentally preparing for it. You just get a feel that's gonna be it's gonna be a challenge for Michigan, and there's a high chance they could lose that game. There's not just a high chance they could lose it, but there's a most likely case that they'll be underdogs. Now, a lot could happen. Who knows? Oregon could take a step back, too. Maybe Ohio State takes a step back. But I think Oregon just keeps building in the right direction. Like Butch Jones, he used to have that quote, brick by brick. I think it was Butch Jones who used to say that quote, former Tennessee coach. And he didn't have the best tenure at Tennessee, but that's certainly the case. And a lot of guys say that case, brick by brick. I kind of like that analogy. That is what Tennessee's doing. That's what Oregon's doing under Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning is just brick by brick, slowly building up Oregon into a strong team. Like, look at Oregon, rewind to the 2022 season, right? Wasn't that 2022 what season, wasn't that Dan Lanning's first season in Oregon? Where they played Georgia. Yeah, 2022, first season. Opens up first loss to Georgia. And then after that, it just seemed like Oregon just kept getting better. And then you look at last year, even though they had the 2 losses to Washington won the national championship. Even though they had those 2 losses to Washington, you thought, man, this is a team that they're just a really good all-around football team, and they just seem to be getting better. And I think what I love about Dan Lanning's Oregon teams is, even when they've lost, even other than that ugly loss to Georgia, they've not been outclassed. And you look at, he's building, they don't really have weaknesses on that Oregon football team. I know we're talking Michigan today, but Oregon's going to be an opponent. Oregon will be very relevant to Michigan at some point. Just because, look at this Oregon, like Dan Lanning's a guy who, I like his quote, good as the enemy of great. Oregon is building a roster where they're strong. There's just not glaring weaknesses on this Oregon team. Like Dan Lanning's one of those guys that if there's a weakness, he attacks it. I'm sure that's how I don't know if I should make this claim because I don't know anything about Dan Lanning as a person really. But I assume he seems like a guy, if there's a problem in his life, he just seems to solve it. I can infer based on the way he coaches that he's that type of guy. Now, I have never met Dan Lanning, but usually the way guys coach, a lot of times they live their life that way. Maybe not always, but in a majority of cases, I can see Dan Lanning as that type of, or that's what Dan Lanning does at Oregon, though, and I can see him as that type of guy. If there's a weakness on this roster, he attacks it. Oh, we need a guy that can rush the passer. Let's go out and get Mateo Uiagalelei. We're replacing some receivers. Let's go get Evan Stewart, former number 1 receiver recruit in the country, a guy that showed ability at Texas A&M. We're losing a quarterback. Let's go out and not just get one. Let's get 2 quarterbacks. Let's get Dante Moore. Let's get Dillon Gabriel. Dillon Gabriel, a guy that I've been a huge fan of. Really liked what he did at did some nice things at UCF, some nice things at Oklahoma. I know there was an injury at Oklahoma. But Dante Moore, a guy that I know well from the state of Michigan, former 5-star guy. So let's bring in 2 quarterbacks. Let's have them battle it out. So Dan Lanning, and then, just working the transfer portal, getting defensive backs. Dan Lanning just attacks. And if there's a weakness, he attacks it. That's what Dan Lanning just seems like, that type of guy. Like, I'll reiterate, I don't know anything about him. I've never met the guy, but he just seems like a guy. He just seems like that type of guy. You know how those people that just seems like a competitive alpha male. If there's an issue, if there's a problem, he goes out and fixes it. That's what Dan Lanning seems like to me. So I want to touch on it. So Ohio State, Michigan's biggest rival, right? Going to be their second, most likely their second toughest opponent. The thing with Ohio State is, I think Ohio State will be a tough game, but Ohio State's in a weird position again. I'm going to try to articulate this point the best I can. Ohio State's in a weird position once again, and what I mean by this is like, I think Ohio State's going to be a good team, but I don't know. There's a strong argument that this might not be an elite team again. And in a given year, can you win a national championship with a good or great team? Sure. But most years, you need an elite football team to win a national championship. 2019, LSU. 2013, Florida State. 2015, Alabama. You look at, those were all elite teams. Obviously, they still won the national championship too. I guess, in other words, like, do I think Ohio State's good enough to win a national championship? But do I also think that, could I also easily see them, like, say they make the playoffs, could I also easily see them losing to, like, so let's say Ohio State wins the Big Ten. They go into the playoffs as a number, let's say 2 or 3 seed. Could I see them, like, I don't think they're like a lot stronger roster than even, who's going to be another good team, like in Texas or Alabama, because where Alabama and Texas are ranked other top, I'm just throwing out other top 10 teams. Like, I don't think they're ahead, like, even, like, let's compare them to Oregon. Like, I don't think I would say they are a better roster than Oregon, but I don't think they're like head and shoulders better than Oregon. And then they're definitely, I would argue that it's a lesser roster than Georgia. And I think this point really backs up my concern with Ohio State. Who isn't a true, let's ask this question honestly. Okay. Like, I would love to ask an Ohio State person this question honestly on the Robert De Niro lie detector test. Outside of let's put aside Jeremiah Smith. I know he's the number 1 wide receiver recruit in the country. I know he could be dominant. He could be the next Marvin. He could be like Marvin Harrison type of impact. I would love to ask an Ohio State this question honestly. They may tell you they may be telling the truth. I'd love to hook them up to a lie detector and ask them this question. Who's the true elite difference maker on this Ohio State team? If you're being honest, let's put aside Jeremiah Smith. I know he's the number 1 wide receiver. I know he could be that guy. Who is the true elite difference maker? Maybe TreVeyon Henderson. I think TreVeyon Henderson he showed that he could, I don't know. I'm torn with TreVeyon Henderson. I want to say that maybe that TreVeyon Henderson is it. I want to say he is. But we haven't necessarily seen him take over a lot of games. He played well against Michigan this past year, but he wasn't necessarily dominant. And then you go back to, had a good game against Notre Dame too. I think it was this past year, but he has not really, like, he's not been that type of, let's throw out a guy, Leonard Fournette or Delvin Cook, for example. You saw games where they just took over the game. There were games where Delvin Cook, like Florida State had that year where they kept coming back. They'd get in those deficits. Delvin Cook would just have explosive big plays. So that's what I would ask. I know that, and then Ohio State added Quinshon Judkins too. I love Judkins too, but is he necessarily an elite difference maker too? I know he's a physical back. I like what he can do. Certainly the guy that can break tackles, a guy that can, finish at the end zone, whatever. But I just don't know. Like, could Tui Maloau or Jack Sawyer be that guy? I think that's the problem with Ohio State. Maybe Caleb Downs. There's about 4 or 5 guys you could say they could be true difference makers, but you can't say that emphatically at this point. I think that's the thing. I think that's what that creates that argument against Ohio State is, on the flip side, is what is the argument for Michigan being good once again. Because you know that Will Johnson, Mason Graham, Colston Loveland are true difference makers. Okay? Especially Mason Graham and Will Johnson. I guess you could make an argument against Colston Loveland, but I would put him in that category of a true difference maker. You know Mason Graham and Will Johnson are true difference makers, and they're going to be guys that play in the NFL, and they're going to play in the NFL for a long time. I just don't know. That's the issue with Ohio State. It's a lot of good, but where's the true difference maker? Maybe TreVeyon Henderson. But once again, though, when TreVeyon Henderson, like, even the two, and he didn't play against Michigan in 2022, right? But in 2021 and 2023, he was good against Michigan. But I was waiting for, like, an Ezekiel Elliott type of performance where he just took over the game. That's what Ezekiel Elliott, when they beat Michigan, when Ezekiel Elliott was there, there was a couple drives, he just took over. I mean, he was the best player on the field, and he showed it. So, Ohio State's going to be good. They're going to be legitimately good. I'll give them that. But when you're getting into the national championship discussion, where are the true difference makers for Ohio State? So, and then, with Texas, it's very interesting with Texas because a lot of people are talking Texas is going to be the favorite over Michigan, right? But you look at Texas and you're like, they're not necessarily, like, just looking on paper, Texas I don't think is a lot stronger than Michigan. I would say I would give them the edge overall. I think if you acquired like a point rating, like if you went, there are 22 starters against the 22 starters. Now Michigan has definitely, their top end players are better than Texas top end players. But if you rated all, you're taking starters versus starters, Texas probably has a better overall score, if you will, has a better 22 starting lineup. But I don't think it's that much better. And you could argue that the difference makers Michigan has would make up for that. That's why I argue Texas is a team that's taken a step back or may take a step back. Because I would argue here's how you can get a gauge a team might take a step back. Because you can make a case that Texas will be better this year. But you can also make a case that they have taken a step back. And you may think, well, Texas still won a lot of games, and even if they take a step back, they should win a lot of games. It varies from year to year, right? So Texas, if they're less than last year, that could mean that if other teams get better, that could equate to an extra loss or two, and that could be huge. So the bottom line with Texas is I think they'll be good. I think they'll be legitimately good, but there is a case they could take a step back. But do they have difference makers? Absolutely. Quinn Ewers, and then their offensive tackle, Kelvin Banks. Those are definitely difference makers. And then they have some good players, too. Isaiah Bond, good player. Ethan Burt, good player. Mukaba, good player. The safety transfer from Clemson. So with Texas, good players, but arguably just two true difference makers. Quinn Ewers and Kelvin Banks. And they both happen to be on offense. Texas did a good job in the transfer portal, too. I thought Michigan would attack the transfer portal a little bit more this year. That worries me because you wonder if Michigan can... I think the transfer portal is a little bit of a momentum thing. Michigan was really carrying strong momentum and getting good transfers. Like, look at prior to the 2022 season, you bring in Oluwatimi. Then this past year, Josiah Stewart, Nugent, Miles Hinton, good transfers. So you have 2 years in a row. Feel like you want to continue that momentum. Now I know they landed some guys in the transfer portal, but I'm a believer. Talk about with Dan Lanning. You go back to the analogy, brick by brick, and Dan Lanning really bringing some good momentum to Oregon. I think Michigan really should have tried to continue that momentum in recruiting, or in the transfer portal, excuse me. But I think you could argue that's a good thing, that Michigan, you could argue they just have the confidence in the guys they have that they could win the Big Ten and repeat. Jade McBurrows, 2. They're projecting him to play at the nickel. Josiah Stewart, 2. Yeah, Michigan certainly have some talent. Just see if it all comes together. Rashawn Benny, 2. That's a guy you want to take the next step. Benny got some snaps last year. Just going to read some more news on Michigan. Yeah, 24/7 just did a post. They're talking about Michigan football camp update on wide receivers: Tyler Morris, Samaj Morgan, Frederick Moore. Yeah, 3 good receivers, right? Talk about Ron Bellamy, Michigan's wide receiver coach, said Tyler Morris reminds him of Ronnie Bell. That's cool. Ronnie Bell he's a strong slot receiver for Michigan. Yeah, just aggressive, competitive. So if Tyler Morris brings a lot of those traits, that's awesome. So they both wear number 8, too. Reps against Will Johnson. Got to believe that's helping the Michigan wide receivers going against Will Johnson. It's like LSU. It was cool to see Derek Stingley going against Jamar Chase. Guys all run to Will Johnson because they want to go against him. Frederick Moore is competing to start, and he's talking about Samaj Morgan becoming a complete receiver. Yeah, Samaj Morgan is a really good receiver. Showed a lot of ability last year. Fast. I mean, definitely has some return ability as well. Talks about another names emerging from Michigan's offensive line. Evan Link. Must be having a good camp. Evan Link. Forget where he was from. I liked his tape. He was, the 2023 class, so he's second year at Michigan. But it sounds like they really like what he's doing. Yeah, I happen to watch Evan Link's tape. I don't watch every Michigan recruit's tape when they land him, but I happen to watch Evan Link just because, the size stood out when I looked at his 24/7 source profile. I think he was from the Washington, D.C. area, I want to say. Make sure I got that right. But, Link, a good player. Washington, D.C., yep. 3-star guy. 6'6", 290. Sounds like C.J. Charleston and Marion Walker look good. The 2 transfer receivers Michigan got. Yeah, Charleston was from Youngstown State. I wonder how some of these media get access to go to practice. Must just get press passes. I wonder if Michigan still does practices open to the public. I know they used to do that. Saturday Night Lights. Do they do one on open practice? Hold an open practice Saturday, August 16th. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that. I was just curious. Really looking forward to, because I love, the games are beautiful in September. Texas and USC game, I'm just really looking forward to those. Oregon, Ohio State, Washington, I'm looking forward to those games too, but they're just further down the road at this point. Texas, USC, those early September games, both in the Big House. Texas and USC at Michigan at the Big House in September. This is just something we may see more often, just because the college football is evolving so quickly, but this is something I never thought we would see, and it's pretty cool. So Michigan, Texas, both in September. Should be really nice weather, and should be a fun atmosphere. I think Michigan, Texas, that'll be a big tailgate. Texas just has a huge alumni base, so I just picture a lot of Texas alumni coming to Ann Arbor to tailgate for that game. And that's going to be fun. That'll be really exciting. It's just crazy. You look at the Michigan schedule and you see brands like you see Texas, USC. It's funny. A lot of times at Michigan early in the season, the first week through 1 through 3 games, it's FCS. You see FCS logo, or you see Bowling Green, Miami of Ohio. But in the case of Michigan, going to saddle up, and Quinn Ewers in Texas and Sarkisian coming to town, and then Lincoln Riley is going to be coming to town too in September. So I got to wrap with that, guys. Thanks for tuning into the Brand Partial Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.